Imagine if it doubles or just triples, what an effect that would have on the economy, where the food won't be enough to feed the entire population. They're going to have to think of different sources for food. So you hit it on the head there. You got the GMO foods, you got the insect proteins, which they're trying to really push. They're really dissuading anybody from going into self-sufficiency. They really want you back into the supply chains of the corporate fives. And anything that you do, farms that are, getting a little bit larger that can supply, tens or dozens of families are suddenly shut down for some reason because they're overproducing too much food and they should be registered as a business. So there's a lot of push and pull here. And I just don't get why, through the repeating cycles that they know, and I'm going to say the globalists, the elitists, the central banking cartel that's out there, totally understand these cycles. And whatever they're doing now to prevent the message from reaching out, and this is what I don't understand, and if the cycles are known, why have we not been warned? Because I think to come together as a full global populace to work through these solutions would be such an easy thing. We have 8 billion people. We're all connected by the internet. We have resources, and then we can build ideas on top of ideas if we just start talking about the solutions. But that's not forthcoming.
Hello, everyone. This is David Morgan of themorganreport.com, and I'm doing a podcast with David DuByne of Adapt 2030. A little bit where I found David, I've been doing a weekly update for the general public for, I don't know how long, at least a year, maybe longer. And I made a consistent 15-minute type of audio, sometimes video, about what's really going on in the financial economy. And I served up like really name brand sources such as Reuters. Occasionally I go off a little bit like Zero Hedge and Wolf Richter and some of these other people. But a lot of them just came straight from like Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC, and others. And one thing that I started noticing more and more and more was this food problem, and it kept coming up. And I think what happened is all those bots out there in this AI figured out I was saying a lot about food and lack of food and food problems and locusts and everything else. And all of a sudden, Adapt 2030 came, and that's an interesting name. And I listened to David DuByne. I've kind of been hooked ever since because he's a straight shooter. He's got a great head and a great heart. And I was going to turn it over to him, David. My first question is for people that don't know you, give me a little bit of a background, and then just kind of lay out why the solar minimum is so important.
Well, the first thing is I used to buy coffee in Myanmar back in 2012 and trying to do a supply forecast out. They talked about cold weather damage to the coffee plants there, and that seemed kind of strange for me because I'd always been a CO2 global warming kind of guy. And the more research I did, it seems like it is a cycle and it's forecastable. And you go back and you take a look at the 11-year solar cycle, which we're in the solar minimum right now. They're really good at forecasting these 11-year cycles when we come to the solar maximum, solar minimum. So if you hear about the solar minimum right now, that's where we're in, and they're waiting for solar cycle 25 to start. Well, if that good at forecasting this smaller amount of time on the 11 years, they should be really good at forecasting out on longer cycles, which are well known through history. And we always see the same three things that happen during this 400-year grand solar minimum. We see social unrest, which leads to governmental collapse. We see population migration, and then a reset of the economy. So, there's so many things that we're seeing today that are dovetailing into this. And why are we being so distracted about everything? And the agenda push with the global warming side of it, why are we not allowed to have discussions? And if I have a set of solar data, which I've studied for so many years now, why can't I present that as just the sky is blue, here's a fact, they have the solar cycles, they have the changes in history. We seem to be at this crux again, but there seems to be a lot of engineering in society, so we can't talk about the problems, we can't really talk about the solutions, and whoever else is out there that knows about these longer term cycles, that knows and can forecast them, wants to retain their power and position in this pyramid that we have set up right now. So I think all the distractions we're seeing presently across the planet, which continue to amplify, and we really haven't seen anything yet. I call it more Hollywood-esque build in the story is going to have to be, each distraction needs to be greater than the last. So COVID is a great one. And as we move forward, it has to be bigger than that. Lockdown 2.0, economic destruction. And then, we got the metals in the intersection of history, sound money, cryptocurrency, reset of government, population migration, unrest, and then governments really positioning in different areas of the world where precipitation's starting, Like North Africa is a perfect example where new food grow zones could come on if our grain belts disappear in Canada, United States, Northern Europe, parts of China. They could reset and use the deserts that are now greening across the planet to grow food. So this is how everything kind of dovetails together, and it all came from buying coffee and the cold weather damage on the top leaf kill, the density of beans, because when they would freeze, you get a little water spherular pocket in there, so the density of beans. There was a lot of real scientific data that, hey, there's a huge change in Burma. Remember, Myanmar was Burma, so when you're getting cold damage in Burma or Myanmar now, it made no sense to me. So I went looking for the answers, and that's why we sit here now, because I started to present everything I was finding, saying, whoa, 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 whoa. This is going to be the biggest problem to come in the last 400 years for our societies and humanity in general. Why aren't we talking about this? And whenever you want to talk about it, you're suddenly cut off in the conversation.
Wow, what an opening. So I want to drill down to the food side a little bit. I mean, the Arab Spring was all this discontent was really about food. And I'm just going to do a quick outline. I'm not nearly as studied in as you, but you know, I'm an active thinker and I like to get the big picture. So this is my kind of rundown. I like to revivify or fortify. If I'm wrong on something, just let the audience know. But to the best of my recollection, we had like a bunch of swine flu recently in China. So there was a bunch of pigs slaughtered there. We've had meat packing plants shut down across the United States. And there's been, and I have this firsthand actually on some hogs that were just farmers didn't know what to do because they couldn't get them slaughtered. I've talked locally, this is again firsthand, take it or not, that the local small butchers, the mom and pop ones, are just, you can't get in for months. They're just booked and booked and booked. The point is there's locusts eating crops across the planet. We've got the Midwest had these massive floods, and I understand that it could curtail the planting season and hit some of the silos for stored food. So this U.S. has got that. China's had massive problems. The U.S. has the stoppage of meat packing, and we get from our friend Christian at the Ice Age Farmer, there's almost a political bent toward making this idea that eating meat bad, eating genetically modified, grown in a laboratory good, and it's good for you. So I know I said a mouthful. Can you just take it from there and really expand it, because you're a little better at it than I am, but it's very important. If you can't eat, it really doesn't matter how much gold you've got, or maybe it does. We'll find out.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, because if you can't eat or food gets so expensive, 3, 4x what you're paying now, the economy was going to collapse anyway. See, understand this from the beginning. In this 400-year cycle of the grand solar minimum, the economy collapses every single time because food gets so expensive that's all anybody can afford to spend on. Where if you had a few extra $1,000s at the end of the month or a few $100s, whatever your range is, all of it would be rediverted to food because of food's 3, 4, 5X. And going back through history, in the grand solar minimums, it seems to come to an apex at 7x above what the baseline is for, let's say today. Although it's higher than it was last year, imagine if it doubles or just triples, what an effect that would have on the economy, where the food won't be enough to feed the entire population. They're going to have to think of different sources for food. So you hit it on the head there. You got the GMO foods, you got the insect proteins, which they're trying to really push. They're really dissuading anybody from going into self-sufficiency. They really want you back into the supply chains of the corporate fives. And anything that you do, farms that are, getting a little bit larger that can supply, tens or dozens of families are suddenly shut down for some reason because they're overproducing too much food and they should be registered as a business. So there's a lot of push and pull here. And I just don't get why, through the repeating cycles that they know, and I'm going to say the globalists, the elitists, the central banking cartel that's out there, totally understand these cycles, and whatever they're doing now to prevent the message from reaching out. And this is what I don't understand. And if the cycles are known, why have we not been warned? Because I think to come together as a full global populace to work through these solutions would be such an easy thing. We have 8 billion people. We're all connected by the internet. We have resources, and then we can build ideas on top of ideas if we just start talking about the solutions. But that's not forthcoming. That's being pushed into the back there. And, Christian's a great resource up at Ice Age Farmer, and he really delves into the way government intersects with the distraction and the movement to get you to accept less food, the shrinkflation, where you're paying more for a smaller, and they just change the boxing on it, or the substitution of foods. Now, I'm of the volition here that we need to switch our grains in different grow zones. So If hard red winter wheat isn't growing, then we saw Texas this year plant the most sorghum acres that they've ever planted. So see, that's the kind of the behind the thing. They say, well, it's the lowest planting in 100 years. So something's going on where there's already a substitution where some species can't grow as good as it did in the prior climatic zone. And it seems like it's kind of on the down low there that they're moving over into new crop species. But I think this should be a full discussion on front page news every single day, because the most important thing for a society is eating. Like you said, I don't care if you have kilograms of gold laying next to you. If you're starving and so malnourished that you can't get off the floor, that means nothing to you, nothing. Food is the most important thing, and whoever controls food in the 21st century will dominate the planet, period.
Well, I have two vectors. One, I'm going to digress, and then I'm going to come back to another question. So you said solutions, and I'm all for it, and I offer some, what I believe, my heart of hearts on the financial side. On the food side, I can offer this. The late, great Michael Rupert, that was in the movie Collapse, talked about what happened when the communist empire was destroyed. And in the North Korean area, they basically starved their people to death because they were absolutely 100% dependent on Mother Russia sending them food, and they weren't sending any. But in Cuba, they had a different approach and said it's community property. Anywhere that there's free land that you can grow something, grow. And so the people went out and worked together and grew food all over Cuba, and they actually did fairly well. In fact, I believe it was a couple of years, I'm trying to quote Mike exactly, but the idea was within a few years, they actually were eating probably better than they ever had. Organic food that everybody was caring for with love, and they were growing their way out of the problem. So that's my digression. You can come back and comment on that, of course. But my thought that may segue into the financial side is, and excuse my arrogance, but I've earned it, folks, and at my age I can say whatever I want. But there's so many people that are misinformed or underinformed about the true cause of the monetary problem. And so when they go to the grocery store, and I've already said, and this is just a wild guess, that food prices will double in a year. Well, that's going to put the big hurt on most Americans, because a lot of Americans are just making it check to check. So when they see that, they're going to equate that with inflation. Some of that's true, but actually it's a supply problem more than an inflation problem. But they're not going to think it through or even know why. All they're going to know is that my food budget doubled. I can't get that six-pack. I can't go to the movies. I can't even run a Netflix. Everything's going to my food budget. That's inflation, and they might start looking at the metals for someplace, if they have any excess funds, to buy some. So I took you two vectors there. I'm sure you can handle them both. And back to you.
Well, if you knew that was going to happen, that the food price was going to double, and we were going to get to the same conundrum you just referenced, you would have to have an excuse for it, because fingers would be pointing right back at the government asking, well, how did you not tell us that this cycle was here? How can you not supply us? Because most people just rely on the supply chain. They never ask questions, or just go along with it and do whatever they need to do to get their money, and they never ask questions, don't care. As long as things are there, everything good. Well, things are starting to disappear, and that problem with the virus didn't cause the economic collapse. The bad running of the central banks from the previous 2008 crash that never got fixed brought us to this point now where it was going to inevitably collapse in on itself. But would you allow the global populace to start pointing fingers and say it was the governments, it was the central banks that caused all this with the economy and where we are sitting into the next Great Depression here? Or would you blame it on something else? Oh, suddenly, magically, at the exact same months when the repo was going to the point where you knew it was broken back in late 2019, suddenly this virus comes out just a month or two later. That's way too, I believe in some coincidences, and but that's engineered. That is not a coincidence. And then we sit here, it explains away so many things. The collapse of entire industries, which would have collapsed, or I wouldn't say organically, but anyway, because of the monetary policies. The price of food increasing at such a high level so quickly, it explains it away as the supply chain is the virus. No, it wasn't. There's all these other factors that sit behind this. But again, if you're going to deflect away responsibility or culpability, you're going to have some giant other excuse. And we see it playing out in real time here. And they've locked the planet down, so you cannot take your money down to other less well-to-do countries. Because you think about, let's say, 1 billion Westerners with funds that we understand, several $1,000s is going to go a long way in different places around the world. So imagine 1 billion people with money moving into impoverished nations, that would upset the complete balance anyway. So I believe they've locked the planet down. So we can't move to other places where food would be cheaper, the grow zones would be better, the climate would be warmer, we could grow our own foods. I think it's all an engineered distraction and retraining. Because, you know, if I might ramble for another second here, going into the supermarket, you know, they only let a certain amount of people in at a certain time. So there's social distancing, you stay 6 feet apart. Okay, David, you come out of the store, I can go in. Well, that is nothing more than a retraining for less supplies when you are in a ration line. They're getting you ready for it. They are getting you ready for it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, going to a different locale and cheaper. I'm here in Mexico, as we discussed offline, and so that's very good, deep thinking. I want to explore what you said earlier about I guess it was the average sevenfold increase in food prices. So let's just take my hypothetical doubling. So somewhere along the line, Susie homemaker, Danny drugstore owner, he goes and sees the food keeps going up and up. So they get the idea, well, the best thing I can do, instead of buying, you know, a pack of tuna, I'm going to buy a case. I'm going to lock in the price now and store it, because that's the best place I can put my money. Forget the stock market, forget, you know, any investments. I'm buying food now because a month from now it's going to cost me more. So I think that's step one. And step two would be, or perhaps we would be seeing people that do have a way to, that have extra funds, and put it into the precious metals, because the one thing I know about the silver market is when inflation gets going, there's nothing that performs better than the silver market. So I'd like you to go ahead and comment on what you think about, you know, storing food and then moving into perhaps the financial realm.
Food will be the new financial wealth. You know, and I'm very much a fan of having greenhouses and protecting your food that you grow, because along with this grand solar minimum, you know, a lot of these changes that we're seeing where there's the extremes in cold or heat or rain, that's all part of this, because when the sun goes low and it's an electromagnetic activity state, that affects our earth too. It affects the way the jet streams are moving and how the clouds are locked into place, or the jet streams are locked into place. So moving forward, we're going to get a lot more extreme rains, and this is the thing that's really going to destroy a lot of crops, which we're starting to see everywhere. So if you're able to grow the food, protect the food, put it in a greenhouse, indoor vertical agriculture, which I believe is going to be part of the solution to restart the economy, do the jobs training, get people skills training, and revamp a lot of just, I would say, dead real estate that's out there. You know, I saw some articles talking about taking shopping malls and turning them into low-income housing. Why don't we use those same shopping malls and turn it into intensive vertical indoor agriculture, so we can feed parking lots, parking garages, all these things. That'll be a new business that comes out. But when it comes to the point where you're spending, like you say, and everybody's disposable income of even having the smallest amount of fun is reduced into, you go to work and you pay for food. You go to work, you pay for food. That's anger boiling at the top. So perhaps they're trying to let off the steam valve right now by letting all these protests go, because people were so angry they were locked down. They're so angry they lost their jobs. They're so angry that things aren't available anymore. I went to an electronics store and I didn't need a new cable for my plug-in for the microphone. I was electronics to Best Buy. They had gaps in every single section of that, because everything was coming from China. It was all coming from elsewhere. It's not coming anymore. So not only are we going to see a constriction of inbound goods, we're going to see inflation as well in terms of food. And then, you know, we're going to watch gold and silver go, and it's just a cycle. And you can really repeat in history. Go back to the 1600s and see what happened during the Maunder Minimum. Go back to 800 AD in the Tang Dynasty collapse in China, or even 1200 is another really good mark. Go back to the collapse of the Roman Empire from 400 to say 535 AD. We start to see the same thing, the debasement of currency, the lack of food, the giantness of government collapsing in on itself because they can't take care of the people, so they need distraction, breads and circuses. And we're back to it again. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes to try to maintain power and control, and all this money printing. Where did all these trillions of extra dollars go? They went to exactly what you say. They were buying stuff. Buy it today, buy a case of food. Well, the government does it. They're buying millions of cases of whatever it is and putting them in bunkers and getting ready for underground bases for continuity of government. You know, some of these supply shortages, like the peas last year. The peas, by the way, just a quick FYI, if you're going to look for a protein source in foods and vegetables, pea as the highest protein source. So canned peas, if you have a choice, choose anything out there that you want to get the protein and the nutrition and the micronutrients and everything in between, peas are your best bet. There was a run on canned peas last year. It was the government that had put out tenders for every single canned manufacturer across the planet, including mainly in the United States, to supply canned peas. So we're getting a lot of government buying. They're buying it now. Well, that's continuity of government. But if you're going to buy multiple cases of things, which I think you should, it's not going to be hoarding. It's going to be about you being smart because you see everything in the future that's about to unfold. So if somebody's going to say, you're buying too much in your cart, I would say you're not studying enough about history.
Interesting. This is pure conjecture, and I'm, want to ask you. My thought currently, subject to change, is that the United States might or may be the last to collapse on amount of food because they'll just keep increasing the prices. In other words, with the guns or butter situation, we've got the military power, and we probably have the wherewithal to force other nations to send us food. Am I off the mark on this? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look around the world, there's only a handful of nations that produce everything they can consume internally and then export out to other nations. There's only a very small handful of those nations. The United States is one. Luckily, we're one of those. And I would say, look at North Africa, because we see the positioning of the Chinese that have been there for 30 years, setting up all their infrastructure. Because if you go back and you take a look, this whole climate debate really locks you into 150 years of history only. You really need to look further back and see these changes our planet's been through, and just massive changes. The savanna and grasslands and small forests used to be all of North Africa, but that's on a 4,500 year repeating rain cycle. And it seems that same cycle has started again with the shift of the West African monsoon, bringing precipitation into central, pushing up to more northern Africa. Well, the Chinese are in there with proof of concept right now with a 100 square mile grow zone. Southern Chad, since the rain precipitation from above ground is increasing, they're also tapping the Nubian aquifer that runs all the way from Libya, which was doing the giant irrigation project in the desert, all the way down. So the coupling of natural above ground precipitation increases and tapping of the aquifers, it is doable to shift. And again, you got to look where the superpowers are all around the planet to position like chess pieces. Iran, another huge grow zone coming on. Afghanistan, the Indus Valley. And again, look back in history and see where Harappa was in the Indus Valley. Go back to Mesopotamia and take a look at what's bone-dry desert was once a verdant milk and honey vineyards area. And you start to see these cycles repeating. So who knows what on these more, let's say, grandiose, larger changes. And then we start getting into geopolitical aspects here. We're using militaries to try to dominate. See, they've tricked us, and maybe it was oil. Maybe it was oil in the beginning. But now these same areas that contained oil that are desert are now becoming growing areas as northern Canada, central Canada, southern Canada go offline for whatever production they have. Imagine if we could bring on more production out of Tunisia and Algeria. What if we could get some production out of Eritrea in the Sudan or Chad or Mauritania? And these places you haven't really heard of, but the domestication of rice across Africa started in West Africa and Chad. And then it's a proof of concept, but you need to go back 4,500 years. Like, who knows these longer cycles where they're positioning themselves based on multi-thousand year rainfall patterns shifting? Takes it to a whole new level there.